Tonight, we're exposing 10 chilling secrets hiding in plain sight. There's a gray Dodge Ram in an airport lot, its scanner logs showing someone coming and going, but no one checked inside until it was too late. Or maybe it's a whisper behind your door when you're sure you're alone. These stories don't start with warnings. They start with something small, a detail you almost ignore, then everything changes. Every story here begins in a place that feels safe, a car, a hallway, a quiet night at home. But safety is just a feeling, and it can disappear in a minute. Sometimes all it takes is a storm. The first story begins on the open sea, aboard the Costa Mirador, a night when a routine drill became something no one on the crew would ever forget. The cruise ship was supposed to be a floating city, always bright, always moving forward. That night, it felt smaller. The weather was rough, but not enough to keep the crew from calling an emergency verification drill. It was standard when the wind picked up. Everyone accounted for, every corridor checked. Even then, I didn't think much about it. I was just coming off my shift, standing by the crew staircase, feeling the ship sway harder than usual. The rain started hitting the windows at an angle, sharp and fast, like someone throwing handfuls of gravel. The corridors were empty except for the low hum of the air system and the occasional shuffle of footsteps. Most passengers had gone to their cabins early. I started my rounds on deck 4 like I always did when the weather turned. My job was to make sure the doors were latched, nothing loose left to roll around. You get used to the silence when everyone's behind their doors. Then I heard it. A scream, sudden and sharp, from somewhere down the hall. I stopped, listening. The storm was loud, but this was louder. I waited for someone to call it in on the radio, but there was nothing. Just the wind and the sound of my own breathing. I looked at my flashlight and realized my hand was shaking. I moved toward the noise, passing by the cabin numbers, counting them off in my head. The air smelled damp, like towels left to dry too long. I reached cabin 4123, where Elise Morgan, a solo traveler from Leeds, was supposed to be. She always asked for extra towels, but her door was closed and the hallway was empty. I checked my log. No requests from her that night. I knocked, waited, and knocked again. No answer. The next cabin was quiet too. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but my stomach was tight. The rest of the crew joined me when the drill finished. We started searching the deck. The automatic lights flickered every time the ship rolled. At the stairwell near Elise's cabin, we found a red stain that thinned out where the rain and seawater had washed it, but stayed too dark to be paint or rust. The investigators later said the slope of the deck would have drained water forward, and only something heavy dragged could have left that trail. We followed it to the edge, but it just stopped. Her shoes were still in her room. Her luggage was untouched under the bed. After the storm, security reviewed the cameras. At midnight, just after the lights flickered, a tall man in black rain gear entered cabin 4123. He left a few minutes later with a dark duffel bag, never looking up at the cameras. Nobody recognized him. Elise Morgan never checked out. The emergency drill was the only reason anyone noticed she was missing that night. The corridor was sealed for the investigation. Her cabin stayed locked for weeks after. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that scream over the storm. After that, every unexpected call or late-night noise felt different. Some nights, all it takes is a single phone call to turn the world upside down. For Brandon, it started with a wrong turn and ended with a silence that still echoes. It's strange how quickly a normal night can turn. The call from Brandon came just as I was shutting off the lights. He sounded tired, maybe scared, and I could hear the engine running in the background. He told me he'd gotten lost, missed the main turn, and now he was nowhere near the highway, but about 25 miles off his intended route, somewhere close to a place called Tatton. He said he'd tried to double back, but the roads all looked the same in the dark, and his GPS kept losing signal. Brandon was 19, but his voice sounded younger that night. He said the trees pressed in on both sides of the gravel road, and he'd only realized he was in trouble when the car slid off into the brush. I told him to keep the doors locked and the engine running, if he could. It was colder than it should have been for spring, and I could hear him shivering, trying to keep his voice steady. I stayed on the phone while I grabbed my coat and keys, asking him to keep talking so I could track where he was. He started to say he heard something outside, maybe a deer, maybe a stray dog. I told him not to open the window, not to get out. Then there was a scraping near the bumper, something moving over the gravel, and Brandon's breathing got sharper. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I told him again to stay put, that I was coming, even though I still had at least 20 minutes to drive. The call dropped in the middle of him describing some lights in the distance. He said it looked like a town, but there's nothing out there. Cell tower records later showed he was miles from any real lights. I tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. I just kept driving, following the directions he'd given before the static started. Every mile felt longer than the last, my mind looping on the sound of his voice breaking up. When I reached the turnoff near Tatton, I found the tire tracks leading off the gravel, down toward a dry creek bed. The car was sitting there, driver's door open, one shoe in the mud, engine off. No sign of Brandon. I called out, then called the police, then called everyone I could think of. That night, we searched with flashlights, stumbling through brush and weeds. Over the next days, volunteers came from all over. They brought dogs, walked grid patterns, even brought in helicopters to sweep the fields. The dogs tracked Brandon's scent through the dry creek bed, but it just stopped mid-stride. No jacket, no footprints, nothing. The police said maybe he ran, maybe he was hiding, but I know my son and I know the way fear sounds in his voice. I replay that call in my head, the static, the gravel, the emptiness. Sometimes listening to my phone's static, I swore I hear the gravel again, then nothing. You start to notice things after a while, the way routines can hide what's right in front of you. In the quiet sprawl of an airport parking lot, there was a gray Dodge Ram that seemed to wait for something, or someone. Most people walked by without a second glance, but not everyone. Some things stand out even when you don't want them to. The gray Dodge Ram in the airport lot was one of those things. I worked nights driving the shuttle and scanning plates, logging each car that didn't belong or looked like it had been there too long. The scanner was supposed to tag every license plate automatically and assign the scan to my badge number. Most nights, I didn't think twice about it. But that truck kept showing up in the far lot, always in the same space, always at an odd angle. It was a plain gray pickup with Kansas plates, dust caked along the sides, and a windshield that somehow stayed clean even after snow and windstorms. I'd see the Dodge Ram every few days, sometimes more often, and it never seemed to move. The weird thing was, the scanner logs showed new entries for the truck under my badge, as if I'd walked right past and checked it fresh. But I knew I hadn't been near it that often. It started to bother me. No one ever claimed the truck. No one came to clear the leaves that built up around the tires. The sticker on the back window had started peeling away, but it was always stuck at the same angle, never any further gone. Some nights when the wind was up, I'd walk the lot and catch myself glancing over at the truck. The way the windshield stayed clear while everything else gathered dust and frost made my skin crawl. It was like the truck was just waiting, untouched, while everything else changed around it. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just another car someone left behind, but the scanner logs kept showing activity, and the truck never moved. Eventually, the unease got to me. I decided to check the Dodge Ram up close. The first thing I noticed was the back window, fogged along the bottom, even though the night was cold and dry. I circled the truck, and before I even looked inside, the smell was so thick I nearly gagged. It was sharp and heavy, nothing like food left out or trash. I called it in, voice shaking, and waited for the police to arrive. They taped off the area and opened the door. Flashlights swept the cab and everyone went quiet. The deputy's report identified the missing man as 53-year-old Randy Potter, whose family had been putting up flyers for months. The truck had sat there all that time. The scanner logs, the clean windshield, the way nobody noticed. None of it made sense. I kept thinking about how many times I'd walked by, how easy it was to miss what was right in front of me. Now every time I scan a plate, I ask myself, could someone be trapped just feet away, waiting for someone to notice? Sometimes it's not the storm or the darkness that keeps you awake. It's the feeling that something is just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to be seen. There's a certain kind of darkness you only find in the woods during a storm. At Boy Scout camp, I learned how a single red light can make you question what's really out there. I was 11 the summer it happened, the youngest in my tent and still not used to sleeping in the woods with rain hammering the canvas. The storm had been going for hours by the time the troop leaders finally called everyone back from the mess hall and announced that lightning hadn't struck for at least 30 minutes, so it was safe to settle in. I lay there listening to thunder shake the ground and the tent poles rattle. Most of the other guys fell asleep fast, worn out from the hike up to the ridge, but I couldn't get comfortable. Every time I closed my eyes, the wind changed or something tapped against the fabric, and I'd snap awake again. I tried reading my handbook by flashlight, but the pages just looked gray and damp. The storm made all the normal night sounds disappear, so you could only hear the rain and the occasional branch snapping somewhere out in the dark. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but then I noticed shadows moving along the tent wall, not matching anything inside. I slid over to the little mesh window and peered out. That's when I saw it. A single red light, just past the tree line, weaving between the trunks. It didn't flicker like a campfire. It moved with this steady, deliberate glide, switching at one point to a deeper red, almost like a night vision bulb. Then it darted sideways, slipping behind a tree, then reappearing further along, always at the same height, never bobbing like someone holding a flashlight. I watched it for what felt like forever. It never got closer, but it never left. It would vanish behind a trunk, then zip to another spot, moving faster than anyone I'd ever seen in the woods, and it made no sound at all. The rain was still coming down, but that light never faded or blurred. I tried whispering to the kid next to me, but he just rolled over and muttered something. I kept thinking, who would be out there in a storm like this, moving like that, not making a single noise? By the time I finally drifted off, the light was still there. When I woke up, the rain had stopped and the woods looked normal. At breakfast, I told one of the troop leaders about the red light. He didn't even look up from his coffee, just said it was probably another scout heading to the latrine with his headlamp. But the latrine was on the other side of camp, and I didn't see anyone else leave their tent that night. I let it go, but the image stuck in my mind. 5 years later, I ran into Drew at a reunion. We got to talking about that stormy night. He told me he'd seen the same red light, but kept quiet because he thought nobody would believe him. He also said the leaders actually searched the woods that night, found no tracks or footprints, and later admitted to making up the story about the headlamps so the younger kids wouldn't panic. That part bothered me more than anything. The idea that the adults saw something strange too, but decided it was safer to pretend it was normal. Even decades later, the memory of its stillness in the storm keeps me awake. Sometimes I wonder if someone or something was out there, just beyond the trees, watching. You start to look at crowds and quiet streets differently after that, scanning for the one thing that doesn't fit. Sometimes, danger doesn't announce itself. It waits under a street lamp, behind the wheel of a black van, following just close enough to make you wonder if you're imagining things. We were walking under flickering street lamps when I noticed him at the curb, a tall, weathered man with silvery gray hair, standing beside a black van parked crooked under the light. He wore a cowboy-style hat pulled low and a black jacket zipped tight, hands shoved in his pockets, just watching. I tried to keep my eyes forward, but Kim squeezed my hand and whispered, "Do you know him?" I shook my head. The street was empty except for us and the van. We picked up our pace, trying to talk about anything else, but I could hear his boots on the wet sidewalk behind us. Not rushing, just matching our steps. I glanced back and caught the reflection of his hat in a puddle. He didn't look away. When we turned the corner toward the pharmacy, I hoped he'd keep going, but I heard the van's door slam and the engine tick as it cooled. He followed us inside, the bell chiming as the doors slid open. The place was almost empty. The cashier, a college kid with headphones, didn't even look up. I watched the man drift down the aisles, stopping every few feet, staring at the shelves without picking anything up. He didn't pretend to shop. Sometimes he'd just stand in the middle of an aisle, eyes fixed straight ahead, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. I told myself to ignore it, but Kim's hand was cold and tense in mine. I used the overhead mirror to keep track of him as we moved through the store. He never seemed to lose sight of us. If we turned down the candy aisle, he'd pause at the end and watch. If we circled back to the drinks, he'd shift to the next row, always just out of reach but never far. We made a joke about which chips to buy, but the words fell flat and thin. I kept glancing at the mirror, watching his reflection. He finally spoke, low and rough, just loud enough to carry, "Hey girls." That was it. No smile, no other words. Kim's grip tightened. We didn't answer. When we headed for the checkout, he moved closer, his boots scuffing the tile. The cashier finally looked up, but didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Kim leaned in and whispered, "Let's go out the back." She pulled me toward the far aisle, past the cold drinks and cleaning supplies. The employee door was propped open, leading to a narrow alley behind the store. We slipped through, hearts pounding. I heard the bell chime again at the front, and I knew he'd realized we were gone. We didn't stop. We ran around the block, cutting through puddles and broken sidewalk, until we reached the corner where our ride was waiting. I saw headlights swing around and the black van pulled in behind us. I didn't think. I just dove into the back seat and slammed the door. The van idled for a moment, then turned away. We didn't say anything for the whole drive home. Nights like that stay with you. There's a feeling that doesn't leave, even when you tell yourself it was nothing. Sometimes when I'm walking into a building late at night, I catch myself listening for footsteps that don't belong, watching for someone standing just out of the light. Hospitals are supposed to be places of healing, but late at night, empty hallways can feel like something else entirely. One delivery run showed me just how thin the line is between normal and unsettling. Some jobs bring you into places most people avoid after dark. Working nights as a pizza delivery driver, I got used to empty hallways and locked doors, but hospitals always felt different. St. Joseph's Medical Center had that drawn-out quiet, the kind that makes you notice every echo, every flicker of light. The order ticket said to deliver a large sausage pizza to the south entrance, third-floor rehab wing. I'd never been to that part of the hospital before, and when I asked about it, the security guard just pointed at the elevator and told me, "You know the way, right?" I nodded like I did. The elevator rattled up to 3. The doors opened on a hallway that was colder than the lobby, with lights buzzing overhead and a strong chemical smell in the air. Most of the doors were closed. The ones that were open showed empty rooms. No beds, no equipment, just old linoleum and leftover tape on the walls. I passed a sign taped to a rolling cart, "Renovation delayed." The whole wing looked like it hadn't seen a patient in weeks. There was dust on the door handles, and the plaque for the rehab wing was crooked, half peeled from the wall. I checked the ticket again. No room number, just third-floor rehab. I walked until I found a door that looked different from the rest. No cleaning sign, no tape, just a closed door with a little window. I knocked and waited. After a few seconds, I heard a voice say, "Come in." It was clear, not muffled, like someone was standing right on the other side. I hesitated, but I needed the handoff to get paid, so I opened the door. The lights inside didn't work. The only glow came from the hallway behind me, just enough to see that the room was empty. No patient, no bed, nothing but a single chair in the corner and a window with the blinds drawn. I started to set the pizza down, but the voice came again, softer, right behind my ear. "Over here." I turned, expecting someone in the bathroom or maybe behind the door, but there was nothing. The air felt colder and I caught a draft against my neck. I set the pizza box on the floor and said, "If you need anything else, just call the desk." My own voice sounded shaky. I pulled the door shut and heard footsteps on the other side, even though I hadn't seen anyone. On the way back, I ran into a nurse. She looked at me like I'd come from the wrong end of the building and asked, "What were you doing down there?" I told her about the delivery. She shook her head and said, "That wing's been closed since October 15th. We haven't had anyone in there for 6 weeks. People who left too soon try not to let dark corners bother you." She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that makes you feel better. I signed out and got back in my car. Sometimes, when I drive past St. Joseph's late at night, I find myself checking the rearview mirror more than usual. It's like you start to wonder what's really waiting in the places most people never go. And sometimes the next call comes in before you're ready for it. Even the most routine calls can turn in an instant. For one officer, a simple noise complaint became a fight for survival, and a lesson in how quickly safety can vanish. On November 29th, 2015, in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, I was on patrol when dispatch sent me out for a noise complaint on Warren Street. It sounded routine, someone annoyed at a neighbor's TV. I remember thinking I'd be home before midnight. The heater in the cruiser was running too high, and the rain made the streetlights look smeared and dull. Calls like that usually meant a quick knock, a warning, and back on the road. The building was a faded 2-story, paint flaking around the windows. I found the apartment. 2nd floor, red door, numbers peeling. The music was barely audible by the time I got there. I knocked, 3 taps, stepped back. The door swung open and there he was, Lance Carr. He looked exhausted, stubble on his chin, gray t-shirt stretched across his shoulders. For a second, I waited for him to say something, maybe deny the complaint or roll his eyes. He didn't. He lunged fast and silent and caught me off guard. His fist hit my shoulder, and I stumbled backward, boots sliding on the old tile. "Training says you stay on your feet, keep the doorway between you and the suspect, but I was already down." He was on top of me, heavy, shaking, and I felt something sharp press into my side. Later they said it was a sharp-edged blade, but I never saw what kind, just the cold line of pain and blood spreading through my uniform. At first, I didn't feel the cut. My mind went blank, just roaring in my ears. I tried to push him off, reaching for my radio, but my hand fumbled the button. He didn't say a word. There was just his breathing and the sound of us scraping on the floor. He pinned my arm and kept pressing the blade in. I remember thinking, this can't be how it ends, not like this. The panic was huge, but I forced myself to move. I got my flashlight with my free hand and swung hard. The shock went up my arm and he staggered back. I tried to get my feet under me, but he came at me again. I reached for my sidearm, managed to fire one shot. It missed, echoing down the hall. I heard glass break, but he didn't stop. The hallway felt too small. I scrambled up, blood on my sleeve, sweat on my face. I don't remember if I shouted for help or just gasped. I made it to the stairs and out into the rain. My radio was still in the apartment. I leaned against the brick, trying not to collapse. Backup arrived a few minutes later. They found Lance's car still inside, pacing, hands shaking. After that night, every call felt different. The routine was gone. Even the quietest complaints made me double-check every shadow, every doorway. I kept replaying the moment right before the attack, wondering if I missed something. I don't know if you ever really get back to normal after something like that. You start to notice how quickly things can turn, how the smallest warning can mean everything or nothing at all. There are nights when you wake up and the air feels wrong, and you know you have to move before something worse happens. There are nights when the air itself feels wrong, when old fears come back to life. For me, it was the smell of gasoline and the sight of a familiar face outside my window. Around 1 a.m. on a spring night, I woke up coughing. The house was filled with this dry, chemical smell that didn't fit. I'd been on edge for months, ever since the protective order, but that night it felt like the walls themselves were warning me. I sat up, eyes burning, and watched the smoke gather at the ceiling in slow, heavy waves. At first I thought it was just the heater, but then the scent turned sharp. Gasoline and lighter fluid, not dust. I heard gravel crunch outside, and when I looked through the blinds, I saw my ex-husband standing in the side yard. He wore that old brown jacket and held a red gasoline can in one hand, a lighter in the other. His face was turned toward the window, thumb flicking the wheel, mouth twisted in a smile. He shouldn't have been anywhere near the house, but protective orders don't stop everyone. I knew the front door might already be blocked, so I went for the kitchen window. The thing about that window is it's 15 feet off the ground and always had a heavy screen. I'd meant to fix the screen months ago, but never got around to it. That night, I didn't have a choice. My heart hammered as I dragged a chair over, climbed onto the counter, and pressed my shoulder against the frame. The screen snapped loose with a sound that felt too loud in the smoky dark. Cold air rushed in, carrying the stink of gasoline and ash. I didn't have shoes, just a t-shirt, but I pushed the window open as far as it would go, squeezed through, and dropped hard to the grass below. The landing knocked the wind out of me, but the pain in my feet barely registered. I scrambled up, cutting across the yard, not looking back. I could hear the lighter click again and again behind me. When I reached the street, my neighbor's porch light flicked on. I pounded on their door until they let me in. The police arrived fast. They found a trail of lighter fluid along the foundation, some of it caught in the weeds, and the back porch already burning. My ex was gone by the time the sirens came, but he'd left the gas can tipped over on the patio. I stayed with my sister after that, sleeping on her couch, always checking the locks twice before bed. I didn't go back to the house. I started training at a gym, learning how to box because I needed somewhere for all the fear and anger to go. One of the trainers worked at the county jail and mentioned job openings. I applied, got hired, and went through correctional officer training, the kind that's supposed to be Secret Service level. Trading one locked door for another felt like reclaiming my power. I learned how to keep my back to the wall, how to watch for danger before it got close. Sometimes when the house is quiet and the yard is dark, I still catch myself listening for footsteps or watching the windows, even if nothing's there. It's strange, the way old fears can linger, especially in the places that used to feel safe. And sometimes it's not people you're waiting for. After Orange, the cat, was gone, the house felt emptier, but the nights grew stranger. Sometimes it's what you see at the edge of the yard that keeps you awake. Orange was with me for 13 years. She was the orange tabby with half a tail, the kind that announced herself before you ever saw her. Even when her steps slowed down, she'd still wedge through the back door before it was open, meowing like she was late for something. Our routine was simple. She'd perch on the kitchen windowsill while I ate, then curl up on the old blue chair for most of the day. When she got sick, that chair was where she wanted to be, head down, eyes half closed, chin pressed to the armrest. When she passed, I buried her at the edge of the yard, right by the hydrangeas. Her collar, the one with the broken bell, I tied to the garden fence. I sat outside until it got dark, talking to her like she was still stretched out on the next chair. A few nights after that, things started to happen. It was small at first, a movement by the woodpile, low to the ground, quick. I figured it was a possum, but when I flicked the porch light on, I caught a pair of eyes reflecting back. The shape was off, longer than a cat, almost dragging, and gone before I could get the door open. The next morning, I found an imprint on the kitchen window. It was a wet oval, about the size of a grapefruit, surrounded by streaks. Like something with a flat nose had pressed up against the glass and slid down. That's not the kind of thing you see from a neighborhood cat. Other nights, I'd be outside taking out the trash, and I'd feel every hair on my neck stand up. I'd look over at the hydrangeas and see two eyes, wide apart and too low to the ground, just staring. Sometimes I'd hear a rattle, claws on bricks, or a scratch where the kitchen wall meets the grass. Always slow, always steady. I started watching for tracks. One morning after rain, I found a line in the mud, like something had dragged a tail. The tracks next to it were wide, wider than my boots, but there were no real footprints, just smudges that didn't make sense. I tried to tell myself it was just a big raccoon, but nobody ever saw one that moved like that. The collar I left on the fence would swing sometimes, even when the air was dead still. I'd check for prints, but there was nothing, just the broken sticks and that long mark in the dirt. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear scratching at the window. It was always the same. A slow, rhythmic scritch, never strong enough to break the glass, but enough to wake me up. I'd get up, look through the blinds, and catch a glimpse of something hunched at the edge of the patio. Shoulders too wide, ears pinned back, eyes following me through the dark. It didn't move like a cat or a dog. It just watched. Neighbors said maybe I was just noticing things more because the house was quiet without Orange. I nodded, but I knew better. The scratching never stopped. The collar kept moving. Some nights I'd set Orange's urn in the sun, and hours later, when the house was silent, I'd swear I heard a purr, soft, just on the edge of hearing. I don't have answers for what's out there. I just know that sometimes you see something that doesn't fit, and it stays with you. You start to pay attention to things you'd normally ignore. The sound of gravel, a shadow at the edge of the yard, a movement that shouldn't be there. And when you're out late, you realize how easy it is to miss the warning signs until it's too late. At a lonely travel plaza off the highway, the sound of knocking from a closed trunk can make you realize how easily the ordinary can turn into something you'll never forget. It's easy to think you know what's normal at a highway stop until something breaks the pattern. The Lone Cactus Travel Plaza sits off Interstate 40 near Flagstaff, half lit by flickering neon and surrounded by nothing but empty road and scrub. I pulled in just after midnight, planning to grab a coffee and stretch my legs. The lot was almost empty, just a couple of idling semis and a cold wind pushing dust across the pavement. That's when I noticed a silver Toyota Camry with Arizona tags, CY7 I think, though most of the plate was hidden under a layer of dirt, parked by the first pump. Nobody stood nearby. The engine ticked, heat fading, but the car was otherwise still. I tossed my empty coffee cup in the trash and started toward the building. Then I heard it. A muted thump from the Camry's trunk, not the kind of sound you get from a shifting bag or a loose jack. It came again, then again, steady and spaced out. I stopped, listening. The trunk rocked just a little, and the thumping turned into a desperate rattling, like someone inside was hammering with both fists. There was a voice, too, raspy, muffled, calling out for help, words lost against the metal. The sound cut through the quiet, and I found myself frozen between the pumps, scanning the lot for anyone else. Nobody. Just the buzz of the sign and the steady, panicked knocking. I fumbled for my phone, hands clumsy, and dialed 911. The dispatcher asked for details: make, color, license plate. I tried to read the numbers, but the dirt made it almost impossible. The knocking kept going, a frantic rhythm that made my chest feel tight. I wanted to run to the car, pop the trunk, but fear held me back. I kept my eyes on the Camry, waiting for someone to step out or for the police to arrive. Minutes passed. Every car on the highway sounded like it might be help, but none of them turned in. Then, just as I started to think I should do something more, the Camry's engine roared to life. The car jerked away from the pump, taillights flaring red, trunk still banging. I yelled, but the sound disappeared into the night as the car sped out to the open road. The dispatcher told me to stay put and wait for a deputy. I stood there, hands shaking, watching the highway swallow the car. Later that week, Deputy Martin called me. They'd found the Camry abandoned 10 miles up the state road, trunk wide open. Inside, he said, there were deep scratches in the paint and broken fingernails wedged into the seams. Just a torn blanket left behind. No sign of the driver, no one in the trunk. The worst part was that the DNA inside didn't match any missing person, and the footprints leading from the car faded just 10 yards into the forest. No way to know who had been in there, or who had gotten out. I think about that night every time I stop at a travel plaza, or see a car parked too long in the shadows. You want to believe you'll notice when something is wrong. But sometimes, even when you do, there's nothing you can do to stop it from happening. I used to think things like this only happened in stories, ordinary places turning strange and dangerous when you least expect it. Now, I see a pattern. Whether it's locked glass on a ship or a parked car at midnight, the ordinary can hide the unimaginable. All it takes is a small detail, a window left open, a car parked too long, or a simple wrong turn. The people in these stories always talk about the moment they realized something was off, and how everything shifted after that. If any of these stories gave you chills, hit like and share which one unsettled you most. Have you ever nearly missed a clue that mattered? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more real accounts of everyday terror. Because sometimes the scariest stories don't stay in fiction.